He was just the janitor. Quiet. Invisible. A single dad with tired eyes and a mop in his hand. But when a new SEAL commander caught a glimpse of the tattoo on his neck, a symbol long buried in classified files, everything changed. What unfolded next wasn't just a revelation. It was a lesson in honor sacrifice and the silent strength that refuses to die. The floor of the SEAL gym gleamed under the flickering fluorescent lights, each tile scrubbed to a quiet shine. Beneath the weight racks and along the shadowed corners of the wrestling mats, a man pushed a mop with steady, deliberate strokes. His movements were calm, efficient, almost rehearsed. Michael Dawson didn't belong to this world anymore, not really. Not the world of tactical drills, barked orders, or adrenaline-laced missions. Those days, like his call sign, were buried. Now he wore silence like armor. A faded green jacket, jeans, slightly frayed at the cuffs, and old combat boots too worn to attract attention. He looked like any other janitor. Invisible, disposable. But there was something in the way he moved. Not even the youngest SEAL recruits could miss it. Not entirely. He was lean with a posture too upright for a man who scrubbed toilets for a living. His shoulders stayed squared, his eyes scanned more than just the floor, and every step he took. Every turn of the mop handle had precision, muscle memory, the kind no amount of janitorial training taught. "Yo, Grandpa, you missed a spot," one of the younger recruits sneered. Michael didn't react. He didn't even look up. David Cole, 22, fresh out of Bud-esque hockey as hell and still high on testosterone, grinned as he tossed a protein bar wrapper onto the freshly mopped floor. A few of his buddies chuckled from behind the weight benches. Michael stepped forward, picked up the wrapper, folded it neatly, and placed it in a trash bin. No words, no glare, just that calm, unreadable stillness. Cole snorted. "Man's a ghost." Behind them, a 300-pound deadlift slammed onto the platform. Grunts, laughter. Music thumped low from a dusty speaker in the corner. And through it all, Michael moved like a shadow. Quiet. Present. Undisturbed. What none of them noticed, what they couldn't possibly know, was the way Michael's eyes had already mapped every exit, every blind corner, every reflective surface. He wasn't just cleaning a gym. He was watching, cataloging, always alert. Because you don't spend 15 years as a Tier 1 operator without leaving part of yourself behind. Especially not when you were once known only by those who mattered as Reaper 1. But Michael Dawson wasn't that man anymore. He was a father now. Just a father. His world was a 10-year-old girl named Clara, an aging Jeep Cherokee with one working headlight, and this quiet job in the shadows of a military base he used to command missions from. "Why does he even work here?" another recruit whispered as they walked by. "Dude looks like he's one bad day away from losing it." Michael heard it. He heard everything. He always did. But he didn't flinch. Instead, he wrung out the mop, straightened the wet caution sign, and moved toward the other side of the gym. Each step echoed with a rhythm only he could hear. A rhythm of footsteps in sand, of rotors overhead, of gunfire that never really fades. He paused near the back wall where the framed photographs of former SEAL teams hung. His eyes glanced, just for a second, at one in particular. A grainy black and white team photo. No names, just faces. Blurred. Smudged. His was there too. Third from the left, half-shadowed. Younger. Unscarred. He looked away before memory caught up with him. The gym door opened with a mechanical groan. A gust of salty wind swept through the space, carrying in a figure that didn't belong to the usual rhythm of protein-fueled workouts and testosterone banter. Commander Cassidy Miller stepped into the gym clipboard, in hand boots polished to perfection. She was 32, sharp-eyed, calm, and carried herself like someone who'd seen just enough to be dangerous, but still believed in the mission. The music cut, conversations dimmed. A few of the recruits straightened instinctively. She scanned the room with practiced efficiency, taking in the layout, the spacing, the cadence of her new command. Her gaze swept past the rows of iron and sweat, past the weight benches and pull-up bars, then landed unintentionally on the janitor in the corner. Michael Dawson. He didn't look up, but something in her froze. It wasn't recognition. Not yet. It was a sense. There was nothing remarkable about him on the surface, just a man with a mop. Older. Quiet. Dressed in civilian fatigue. But there was something oddly composed about his presence. Something you couldn't teach in any manual or SEAL handbook. Like he belonged in the room in a way no janitor ever should. Cassidy watched as he picked up a sweat-drenched towel someone had left on a bench, folded it without fuss, and placed it in the hamper. His hands were steady, precise, his back unbent. Commander, one of the recruits, called. She blinked. "Carry on," she said. Voice even. She made a note on her clipboard, but her eyes drifted back once more. That man. Something about that man. A few feet away, David Cole chuckled. "You see the way he just floats around? I bet he thinks he's a ninja or something." Michael smiled. Just barely. And just for a second. The kind of smile that wasn't really a smile at all, more like a whisper of one. The kind that said, "I've heard that 1,000 times, and you're not even in the top 10 of insults." And for the first time, Cassidy saw it. That flicker of control. That faint trace of quiet command. It was subtle, but unmistakable. She made no comment. Didn't pull rank. Didn't question. Not yet. But as she turned to leave the gym, a single thought lingered in her mind. That man is not just a janitor. She didn't know his name. Not yet. But something told her. She would. Commander Cassidy Miller had learned early in her career that respect was never inherited. It had to be earned, often in silence. On her first official morning as commanding officer of SEAL Training Facility, Echo 6, Cassidy stood before a one-way mirror overlooking the obstacle course. Her uniform was pressed to regulation perfection boots, shined insignia clean. But it was her presence, not her decorations, that filled a room. Her posture, her focus, the way her eyes moved, as if weighing every man and every movement below her, told the truth. She had walked the fire and returned, sharpened, not burned. At 32, Cassidy was the youngest female commander Echo 6 had ever seen. Some still doubted her. Of course, there were always whispers in the locker rooms, the half-muttered comments in mess halls. "She's here because of politics," they'd say. Or worse, she probably never saw real action. They didn't know she'd lost 2 ribs to shrapnel during Operation Ice Lance. They didn't know her father had been a SEAL before her, or that she'd refused every shortcut thrown her way because of his name. They didn't know the hours she'd spent sleeping beside her father's hospital bed, listening to his pain-fueled stories of war and sacrifice, or the way he spoke only once about a man who had saved him in a mission no one else survived. He never got a medal, her father had said, voice hoarse. Why not a young Cassidy had asked. Because ghosts don't get medals, he said. And he was the best ghost we ever had. Cassidy snapped the memory away as the wind shifted outside. A bell rang. Recruits began lining up for morning inspection. She turned on her heel and made her way to the gym, the heartbeat of the facility. Inside, the SEAL gym was alive with kinetic chaos. Metal clanged against metal. Ropes creaked. Lungs fought for breath. The air was a cocktail of sweat chalk and testosterone. Cassidy entered with quiet authority. Conversations faltered. A few men stood straighter. Some saluted. She nodded in return. No flourish, no grandeur, just the precise acknowledgement of someone who didn't need to prove herself anymore. "Commander on deck," someone muttered. She walked the perimeter with measured steps, clipboard in hand, observing, listening, and then, without meaning to, her eyes landed again on him. The janitor. Same man. Same faded green jacket. Same silence. He was crouched near the far wall, scrubbing beneath a line of free weights with a worn rag. Methodical. Dignified. His face was calm, unreadable, but his hands told a different story. They moved with the grace of someone trained to do things much more dangerous than cleaning gym mats. Cassidy slowed her pace. There was an instinct trained into every elite operator, an inner radar that ticked whenever something didn't match. And this man, he didn't match. She'd seen janitors before. She'd seen veterans working post-retirement gigs, holding on to purpose in modest roles. But this man's posture wasn't retirement. It was restraint, like a wild hawk choosing to perch in a pigeon's cage. As Cassidy watched from a distance, David Cole swaggered into view, tossing his towel onto the floor, right where the janitor had just cleaned. "Oops," he said, smirking. Michael didn't react. He picked up the towel, walked it calmly to the laundry bin, and returned without breaking stride. Cole turned to his friends. "Guy's like a damn robot. Bet he sleeps in a mop bucket." A few of the younger recruits chuckled. Cassidy said nothing. Instead, she stepped behind a weight bench and continued her silent survey of the room, but her eyes flicked back to the janitor now and then, and that's when she noticed it. As he bent to lift a misplaced barbell plate, his collar shifted, just for a second, but long enough for her to see it. A tattoo. Not just any tattoo. A trident, twisted with a serpent, inked in cold black. Scarred over once like it had been burned. Cassidy froze. Her pulse didn't spike. She was too well trained for that. But a memory surged like ice through her spine. That symbol, that exact tattoo. She had seen it once, and only once, in a top-level declassified file her father had left her in a sealed box, marked, "In case I don't make it." It was the mark of an experimental unit from 2 decades ago. Reaper Unit, a group so classified that their missions were sealed in red tape and erased from digital records. Their existence had never been officially confirmed. Only one name had ever been whispered in association, Reaper 1. According to the file, he was presumed dead. KIA. No body recovered. No ceremony. No closure. Cassidy's breath hitched. That tattoo wasn't a fashion choice. It was a death sentence. A warning. A relic of someone who wasn't supposed to exist anymore. She turned away quickly, swallowing the knot in her throat. She didn't want to jump to conclusions. Tattoos could be copied. Stories distorted. But something inside her, a daughter's instinct, a soldier's memory, told her the truth was standing right there, with a mop in his hands and a past on his skin. Back in her office, Cassidy closed the door behind her with a soft click. She pulled a key from her chain, opened the bottom drawer of her filing cabinet, and slid out the old file with the faded label, Reaper Unit, classified eyes only. She stared at the attached photograph, grainy, night vision green. A man crouched beside a Blackhawk in the darkness, his face obscured. But the tattoo, identical. She ran her fingers over the image and whispered to herself, "It can't be." Back in the gym, Michael Dawson folded his rag with the same reverence some men gave to the flag. He felt her eyes earlier. He had known the moment she walked in. Her footsteps didn't match the others. Too measured, too calm. He knew military cadence when he heard it. And he'd felt her stare. She saw the tattoo. He sighed. He hadn't meant for this to happen. But ghosts didn't stay hidden forever. Not when the wind shifts. And certainly not when a new commander walks in wearing the same steel in her spine as her father once did. The wind outside the gym kicked up dust and salt from the nearby coast, rattling the chain-link fence that lined the base like a forgotten spine. Inside the atmosphere was a world away, sweaty metallic, a symphony of iron on iron and the rhythmic cadence of boots on rubberized floors. Michael Dawson worked in silence. Same mop, same tempo, same worn jacket hugging his shoulders like a second skin. He moved between the weight racks without disturbing the flow of the SEALs in training, like furniture, some would say, like background noise. Except for Commander Cassidy Miller, who had already learned that nothing about Michael was background, not after what she'd seen. The tattoo hadn't been an accident. It was a moment, a slip in the veil, a hint from a ghost. The trident coiled with a serpent. She hadn't stopped thinking about it since. She'd memorized its placement the left side of the neck, low just above the collarbone. The ink was slightly blurred, as if it had been branded, not printed. Scarred and aged. And that unit Reaper wasn't supposed to exist. But it did. She'd seen the file sealed in her father's old war chest, like a relic from a forgotten battlefield. And now, it was standing in front of her, scrubbing the mats in a gym full of kids who had no idea what real war looked like. "Hey, Mop Man," David Cole called out, voice cocky. I think someone puked near the bench racks. Laughter. Cassidy turned as she entered. David again. Always David. Michael didn't flinch. He simply dipped the mop in the bucket and moved toward the spot like it was a daily ritual. Cassidy crossed the floor, the smell of cleaning solution mixed with sweat as she passed the line of recruits doing deadlifts. She caught a glimpse of Michael mid-step, his jacket collar slightly askew from the movement. She slowed eyes trained not on his hands or his mop, but on that sliver of skin exposed just beneath the neckline. There it was again. Clearer this time. Trident. Serpent. Scar. Her breath hitched for a fraction of a second, buried under layers of command training. She turned to the recruits. "Continue your reps," she ordered, voice even. Then casually, she moved toward the far side of the gym near the utility closet. Michael had just finished mopping the final corner. "Excuse me," she said. Michael stopped but didn't look up. "Yes, Commander." That voice, calm, level. Not deferential, not hostile. Just composed. Like a man who'd seen every battlefield and decided long ago not to be rattled by rank. She studied him for a moment. The gray at his temples, the calm in his eyes, the quiet in his stance. "I'd like to speak with you," she said. Michael blinked once slowly. "Am I in trouble?" "Not yet," she replied. That earned her the faintest twitch of his lips. They met in her office 15 minutes later. Michael stood hands folded behind his back, not like a janitor reporting to a superior, but like a soldier evaluating the terrain. Cassidy leaned against the edge of her desk, arms crossed. "You dropped something the other day," she began. Michael said nothing. "Your collar." Still no response, just that steady gaze. I saw the ink, she added. "Reaper unit." A pause. Then Michael exhaled slowly through his nose, like a man who knew this conversation was inevitable. "I figured you might. You're not just a janitor." He tilted his head slightly. "Is that a compliment or a warning?" Cassidy stepped closer. "It's a question." Michael met her eyes. "Then let me give you a truthful answer. I'm no one." "Bullshit," she said softly. He didn't react, but something in his jaw tightened. "Who are you?" "Really?" she asked. Another long silence. Finally, he spoke. "I was Reaper 1, he said. "Long time ago. Long before this mop, this base, or these kids." Cassidy's breath caught. "My father," she said slowly, "was Lieutenant Commander Marcus Miller. He was pulled out of a failed extraction in Kandahar in '08. His team was wiped out. Intel said a lone operator dragged him out of a collapsed compound under enemy fire. He never named the man, just called him the Reaper." Michael's eyes drifted to the window. "I remember him," he said. "Why didn't you ever come forward? Let him." Thank you. Michael turned back to her. Because men like me don't exist on paper. We're created off the grid, deployed into silence, and when it's over, we disappear. That's the deal. But why become a janitor? Cassidy asked. You could have trained generals. Michael's expression didn't change. My daughter, he said. She's 10. Her name is Clara. She's everything. Cassidy softened. You still live by the code, she said. Michael gave a half smile. I live by one now. No glory, no recognition, no violence. Just kindness. Just peace. She stared at him as if trying to reconcile the legends she'd read with the man in front of her. You know, she said, I thought that kind of warrior only existed in stories my father told me to help me sleep. Michael looked her in the eyes. Then maybe it's time for stories to come true. Back in the gym, David Cole watched the office door from across the room. He narrowed his eyes. Something was off. Why was the commander talking to the janitor? And why, when she finally exited, did she glance back at him, as if he were something more than just a man with a mop? Cole didn't know it yet, but that moment had just altered the trajectory of everyone in the building. Because once a ghost is seen, the world is never the same again. Cassidy Miller sat alone in her office long after the gym lights dimmed. Outside, the wind howled against the aluminum siding of Echo 6, whistling through the cracks like ghosts looking for a way in. The base had quieted. Only the hum of the security monitors and the occasional thud of late-night boots echoed down the corridor. But Cassidy's world was far from still. Her hands hovered over a battered olive-green file folder pulled from her father's private war chest. It bore no seal, no government stamp, just a single label handwritten in black marker and slightly faded with age. Michael Dawson. Reaper 1 status, presumed KIA. She stared at the words like they might shift, disappear, rewrite themselves into something more rational. But they didn't. Michael Dawson, the man mopping her gym floor that morning, the man with the eyes of a soldier who had seen too much and chosen silence over ceremony, the man her father had whispered about in half-remembered stories, while hooked up to morphine in a VA hospital room. There was one mission we weren't supposed to survive, her father had once said. We were cut off, hunted. It was a black op, deniable by design. But someone came for us. Alone. No patch. No backup. Just death walking. And he carried me 3 miles through the desert. Called in a bird using a broken satellite comm and a prayer. Cassidy hadn't known what to make of the tale back then. A child's myth, perhaps. The way dying men tell stories to pass time. But now she knew the myth had a name and a tattoo. She flipped the folder open. Inside were blurred satellite images, portions of redacted mission logs, and a black and white photograph. Grainy. Night vision enhanced. 4 men advancing through sand. One slightly ahead of the others, carried a wounded soldier on his back. Her father. The timestamp read, Kandahar outskirts. 0312, 2008. Cassidy leaned back in her chair and closed her eyes. The weight of truth settled like a stone in her chest. Michael Dawson had saved her father's life, and now he was sweeping floors, wearing a mop like penance. But why the next morning, Cassidy arrived at the gym earlier than usual. Michael was already there. As always. He stood by the back wall, emptying a bucket into the janitorial sink, the sun just beginning to spill gold across the concrete floor. The scent of bleach lingered in the air. Cassidy approached. Good morning, she said. He nodded. Commander. A beat of silence passed, the kind that meant something more than silence. I read the file, she said quietly. Michael didn't respond. I know what happened in Kandahar. I know you were declared KIA. I know my father owed you his life. Still no reaction. Just the calm movements of a man folding a rag into precise squares. I want to understand why you never came back, she pressed. Michael finally looked up. His eyes, a piercing gray blue, held a storm of memory behind them. Because I wasn't the same man who left that desert, he said. I wasn't someone the Navy wanted to pin a medal on. Cassidy furrowed her brow. What do you mean? He leaned against the sink. Reaper Unit was never about medals. We were sent to places that didn't exist on any map, to do things that no one would admit had happened. And when one of our own was compromised, Command wanted us to cut him loose. They called it a containment directive. And you didn't follow that order, Cassidy guessed. I followed my conscience, Michael said. I went back for him. Who? Michael's jaw clenched. Your father. Cassidy's breath caught. Even though she'd suspected it, hearing it aloud changed something. It wasn't just a war story anymore. It was hers. And what happened after she asked? We were exfiltrated by a private contractor on an unmarked bird. Command ordered me to disappear. The mission was sealed. I was declared dead. They offered me a clean break and a monthly stipend to keep my mouth shut. And you accepted that I didn't care about recognition, he said. I just wanted peace. I wanted a life where no one bled in my arms again. A life I could raise my daughter in without the echo of gunfire. Cassidy stepped closer. But why take a job here? At a SEAL gym, doesn't it? Haunt you? Michael's smile was faint. Sad. It reminds me of what it means to start over. These young men think war is glory. I used to think so too. Now I clean up after their sweat, their pride, their noise. And maybe that's enough. Cassidy nodded slowly. Her voice softened. It isn't penance, Michael. He looked up. No, it's character. Later that afternoon, Cassidy sat in her quarters holding a small metal box. It had belonged to her father. Inside was a silver lighter, a SEAL trident pin, and a folded scrap of paper. On it, in her father's handwriting, was a single sentence. If she ever finds him, tell her he already saved 2 lives, mine, and the life I built after. Tears welled in her eyes. This wasn't just closure. It was inheritance. Her command, her convictions, her very sense of what it meant to lead it had been shaped by a man who had once been carried through fire by Reaper One. She stood up and looked out the window toward the gym, and for the first time in years, she felt like the past hadn't just haunted her. It had finally come home. Dust swirled through the shafts of morning light beaming into the gym, dancing in slow spirals above the floor where sweat iron and youth collided in loud repetitions. But amid the chaos, one figure moved quietly, broom in hand, as if his world existed on a slower, deeper frequency. Michael Dawson swept the mats with reverence. To the untrained eye, he was a man fulfilling a lowly task. To the trained mind, he was something else entirely present, composed, and intentional. The way he held the broom, the way he scanned the edges of the room before every pivot, how his breathing never broke rhythm, these weren't habits of a janitor. These were the reflexes of a soldier, a warrior trained to survive the quiet moments between violence. Commander Cassidy Miller watched from the far side of the room, clipboard in hand, but eyes far from her task list. She had barely slept. The file, her father's note, the truths Michael had admitted. It should have shaken her. Instead, it steadied her. Now that she knew she couldn't unsee it, the quiet dignity in how he mopped around a scattered dumbbell instead of kicking it aside. How he bent to tie an untied shoe of a distracted recruit mid-sprint without saying a word. How he picked up a water bottle one of the kids left behind and placed it neatly on the bench. Labels always turned outward. Lid always twisted shut. No motion wasted. No arrogance. No noise. Just respect for space, for people, for life. She remembered what her father once said about true leadership. Some men lead with words. Some lead with medals. The ones I follow are the ones who make everything around them better, even if they say nothing at all. Michael was that man. And now that she knew the past, she started to understand the present. In the corner of the gym, a barbell hit the floor with a metallic thud, loud enough to draw attention. David Cole stood over it, his breath heavy, ego heavier. 405, baby, he announced, wiping sweat from his brow. A few of the other SEAL trainees clapped. Some nodded, some rolled their eyes. Michael said nothing. He simply continued sweeping, moving in an arc near the racks until the broom stopped in front of the barbell. "You mind?" he asked softly. David turned, smirking. "What, you scared you'll trip over it, old man?" Michael's lips didn't move. He simply knelt down and without fanfare lifted the 405-pound barbell clean from the floor, walked it 5 paces over to the rack, and placed it back gently like it was glass. A silence rippled through the gym. David blinked. You, been lifting long?" Michael didn't answer. He picked up the broom again. Cassidy fought a smile. There was no need to humiliate, no need to lecture. Just action, measured and controlled. It was one of the most elegant displays of strength she had ever seen. Later that day, Cassidy found herself wandering the east courtyard, an open area behind the mess hall that most people used as a smoking zone or post-training break spot. The sun was high, cutting through the clouds in long streaks of warmth. She turned a corner and found Michael kneeling beside a small flower bed near the perimeter fence. He wasn't weeding, he wasn't trimming, he was planting. Small white and yellow flowers, daisies. "Didn't expect you to be a gardener," she said. He didn't turn, just continued pressing the roots into the soil with weathered hands. "My daughter loves them," he said after a beat. "She says they look like sunlight with a heart." Cassidy approached. "Most people here don't even realize this bed exists," she said. Michael gave the faintest smile. "Most people don't look down unless they've dropped something." She crouched beside him, careful not to step on the fresh soil. "Can I ask you something?" "You can always ask." "Why do you still serve here? Like this? Not on the front lines. Not in an office. Just the mop, the broom, the flowers." Michael paused, his hands resting in the dirt. "Because dignity doesn't come from rank. It comes from choosing to care when no one's watching." Cassidy sat back quiet. "Young soldiers here," he continued. "They think strength is in shouting loudest, lifting the most, charging in first. I used to think that too." He dusted off his palms. "But real strength, it's in restraint, in consistency, in kindness that isn't owed but offered." Cassidy swallowed the lump in her throat. "You're doing more for morale than you know," she said. Michael looked up, his gaze direct, but warm. "I'm not here to be seen. I'm here to serve." She stood, brushing her hands. "Well, I see you, Michael. And I'm grateful." That evening, a small envelope was slipped under Cassidy's door. Inside was a crayon drawing, slightly wrinkled, carefully colored. A girl with pigtails, holding a bunch of daisies, standing beside a tall man in a green jacket. At the bottom, written in uneven handwriting, "Thank you for making my dad smile." Clara Cassidy stared at it, tears burning behind her eyes. Michael Dawson wasn't just a soldier. He wasn't just a father. He was a quiet miracle walking among them. One flower, one mop stroke, one wordless act of dignity at a time. The gym was unusually crowded that morning. Rumors had started swirling, quiet ones passed between reps and whispered under locker room noise. No one knew where they began, but by dawn, the trainees were watching the janitor differently. Less as a ghost, more as a question. And no one hated that shift more than David Cole. He'd spent months building dominance in this space, becoming the loudest, the strongest, the one everyone deferred to when the instructors weren't looking. But now eyes were drifting elsewhere. toward the man who never spoke, never lifted in front of others, and yet somehow carried weight far heavier than iron. Cole watched from the bench press station as Michael Dawson wiped down a bench with his usual slow, deliberate rhythm. Calm, composed, dangerous somehow in his silence. Cassidy Miller stood by the far wall clipboard, in hand observing the morning drills. She wasn't just watching form, she was watching character. Cole noticed, and that more than anything, set something hot and ugly twisting in his chest. Michael had just finished wiping down a barbell when Cole approached. "Hey you," the recruit called loud enough to draw attention. "Got a sec?" Michael didn't respond. He simply moved to the next rack. "I'm talking to you, janitor." Still nothing. Cassidy's gaze flicked toward them. Cole stepped forward, deliberately kicking over a half-full water bottle so that its contents spread across the freshly cleaned floor. "Oops. Think you missed a spot." Michael paused. His eyes scanned the spill. Then quietly, he walked to the supply cart, retrieved a towel, and crouched to mop it up. Cole smirked. Must have been a real honor to go from combat boots to scrubbing floors for kids. Michael didn't answer. "I bet you tell yourself it's humble work. Noble even. But it's just pathetic." Still crouched, Michael began drying the floor, slow, careful circles, as if the words didn't touch him, and then Cole leaned in, voice lower now. "I heard you were somebody once. But now you're just another broken-down vet with nothing left to give." A hush fell over the gym, the kind that rolls in before thunder. Michael slowly stood, folding the towel neatly. He turned, and for the first time looked David Cole in the eyes. What Cole saw wasn't anger. It was stillness. Depth. The kind of depth that made you feel like you were standing at the edge of something bottomless. Michael spoke, voice calm and steady. "You've got strength, Cole, but no control. And without control, you're just a liability in uniform." Cole's face flushed red. Who the hell are you to say that Michael stepped forward, not fast, not threatening, but close enough that his presence settled like pressure? "I'm someone who's buried too many kids who thought like you." Cassidy took a step forward, but stopped herself. She could feel it, that invisible thread tightening in the room. Cole scoffed. "You think you're better than me?" "No," Michael said. "I know what you'll become if someone doesn't stop you." Then he turned to walk away. But Cole wasn't finished. He reached out, grabbing the shoulder of Michael's jacket. And in that one motion, everything changed. The collar slipped, just enough. Just wide enough to reveal the tattoo, the trident wrapped in serpent coils, scorched and scarred. Someone gasped. Another whispered, "That's it. That's the mark." From the Black Ops file. Cassidy froze. It was happening right here in front of everyone. Michael didn't flinch. He calmly adjusted his collar and turned to face the room. The gym was dead quiet. Every weight forgotten. Every breath held. Cole looked around, suddenly unsure. "What is that?" Some prison ink. Cassidy stepped in now, her voice slicing through the silence. "Stand down, recruit." Cole's jaw clenched. "Ma'am, with respect," I said, "stand down." Cole took a step back, seething but silent. Cassidy turned to the room. "This man," she said loud enough for all to hear, "was Reaper 1 Delta SEAL. Ghost Unit, presumed KIA. His missions aren't on your textbooks because they don't teach what can't be replicated," the gym murmured. Cassidy's voice softened, but only slightly. And he chose to disappear. To raise a daughter. To serve in silence. So before any of you judge him, ask yourselves one thing. What would you give up to protect what you love? Michael stood still, unmoved by the shift in atmosphere. He'd seen this before, admiration that came too late. Awe that meant little. But Cassidy wasn't speaking to glorify him. She was protecting the truth. The truth that valor wasn't volume, that service didn't always wear stripes or medals. After the session, Cassidy found him in the supply room rinsing out mop heads. "I didn't mean for that to happen," he said without looking up. "I know." She hesitated, then stepped inside. They had to see it. "Who you are." Michael turned off the faucet. "I'm not that man anymore." Cassidy met his eyes. "Maybe not. But you are the man these recruits need to see." He dried his hands and leaned against the sink. "They'll forget by next week. Heroes are only exciting when they're mythical." Cassidy shook her head. "Not this time." He gave a small, sad smile. "That's not my call to make." She stepped closer. "No, but it's mine. And I say it's time they learn from someone who lived what the rest of us only train for." Michael didn't answer right away, but in his eyes there was a flicker, an ember long buried, stirred by wind. Not pride, not ambition. Purpose. The knock was soft. 3 measured taps. Commander Cassidy Miller looked up from the file spread across her desk, the same one she'd opened every night for the past week, reading and rereading every line, every half-redacted sentence, as if they might finally tell her what they hadn't before. She closed it now, gently, and stood. "Come in." The door opened, and Michael Dawson stepped into her office. He didn't wear his usual green jacket today. Just a plain gray t-shirt, sleeves rolled, revealing forearms, marked not by ink, but by scars. Tiny ridges. A story of shrapnel blades burns. He stood in silence, waiting. Cassidy motioned toward the chair across from her. "Please." He hesitated before taking the seat, straight back. Eyes, calm, hands folded. Like a soldier reporting for a briefing. Cassidy sat down slowly. No words at first. Only the sound of the wall clock ticking off seconds like footsteps down a long corridor. She opened the folder, slid it across the desk. It stopped in front of him. Michael didn't look down. But she did. "Is this you?" she asked, voice steady. A long pause. Then finally he glanced down at the image, grainy, low-res night vision green. A man carrying another through desert dust, face half obscured, and he said without drama, "Yes." Cassidy exhaled, not in relief, in confirmation, a truth finally spoken aloud. "You were presumed KIA. Michael nodded once. That was the idea. Why his voice was low calm? Because dead men don't need debriefings, or trials, or blame. Cassidy studied him. There was a cover-up. Michael tilted his head. There was a mission. And what happened on that mission? Another long pause. He leaned back, gaze drifting to a spot on the wall behind her, like he was staring through it through time itself. "We were sent to extract an asset. Intel said she was a deep-cover informant inside a cartel-backed paramilitary group. Location was remote. 0 satellite coverage. No backup, just us." He paused. Then it all fell apart. Cassidy didn't interrupt. She let him breathe it out. "We walked into an ambush. We lost 2 men in the first minute. Comm was jammed. The asset was already dead when we reached the bunker." He swallowed hard. It was a setup. Somebody wanted us off the map. Cassidy's hands clenched in her lap, and my father Michael looked at her now. He took a round to the lower back. I dragged him out through a canyon under fire, got him to a dry riverbed, found an old SATCOM unit and a downed bird from a previous op, used a bypass loop and a mirror signal to bounce a rescue ping. She blinked. "You did all that?" "Alone," Michael shrugged. "It wasn't bravery, it was math. I was the only one still moving." She leaned forward. "You saved him," he told me. Not by name, but by story. He said the man who saved him didn't speak, didn't wait, just vanished. Michael's face remained unreadable. He said you were death walking. A shadow flickered across his expression. I was close enough. She studied him gently. Why not come back? Take the medal, the record. You could have written your ticket. Michael exhaled. My CO offered me a deal: disappear quietly or face court-martial for insubordination. They wanted someone to blame. I had disobeyed a stand-down order to retrieve your father. Cassidy stared, jaw clenched. They punished you for doing the right thing. They called it compromising mission integrity. I called it keeping a promise. She felt her throat tighten. He added more softly. Besides, I didn't want a parade. I wanted peace. She nodded, barely holding it together. Do you know what he said about you? She whispered. On his last night, Michael looked up. Cassidy reached into her desk and pulled out a worn scrap of paper folded with care. She handed it to him. He unfolded it slowly. The handwriting was shaky, fading but clear. He saved my life. Not for glory, not for orders, just because he believed it was right. If she ever finds him, tell her he already saved 2 lives, mine, and the life I built after. Michael's hand tightened around the paper, then loosened. His eyes closed. And for a brief second, the silence in the room was no longer heavy. It was sacred. I never got to thank him, he said, finally. Cassidy stood. You just did. Outside the office, the sun was beginning to set, casting long golden shadows across the training field. Michael and Cassidy walked in silence. They stopped at the overlook near the helipad, a place where the wind always moved faster than the world below. Cassidy turned to him. So, what now? Michael looked out toward the horizon. I keep cleaning the gym, he said. She blinked. Seriously, he smiled gently. Dirt doesn't care what you did in Kandahar. She laughed, a short, surprised sound. I meant, do you want your record restored? Recognition reinstatement? He paused, then looked at her. I don't need a title to teach, she nodded slowly. Then let me offer you something better, she said. Not a rank, not a ribbon. He raised an eyebrow. A chance to guide them, she said. To help these kids become more than muscle and ego. You've lived the cost. That's the kind of wisdom they'll never find in a manual. Michael was quiet for a long moment. Then finally, he extended his hand. Only if I still get to sweep the mats. She took it. Firm. Solid. Real. Deal. That night, as Cassidy sat alone on her bunk, she glanced at her father's photo on the wall. Then she looked at the folded scrap of paper and smiled. Justice hadn't come from a courtroom. It had come from truth. Quiet. Steady. Earned. Like the man with the mop, whose silence had finally spoken louder than any battlefield. At 0430 hours, a black SUV rolled through the northern gate of Echo 6 without headlights. Its windows were tinted, its tires silent over the gravel. No insignia, no base clearance decals. Just a small magnetic tag on the front grille, barely visible, but immediately understood by anyone who'd worked in classified ops. JCS Internal Oversight. Inside the vehicle sat Admiral Charles Dalton, a man who wore 4 stars. Like other men, wore regrets. His face was stone, his jaw square, and his voice rarely raised above a whisper, because power didn't need volume. It only needed clarity. He'd been briefed 16 hours earlier. Subject Michael Dawson, alias Reaper 1, presumed KIA, confirmed alive. Eyewitness verification from base commander. He didn't like ghosts, especially the kind that returned from wars the government had buried. And he sure as hell didn't like them showing up mopping gym floors in active SEAL facilities. Cassidy Miller stood at parade rest as Admiral Dalton entered her office, flanked by 2 staff officers in navy blue. Her uniform was flawless. Her jaw was tight. Her mind sharpened like a knife's edge. Commander Miller Dalton said evenly, "Admiral." He didn't sit. He simply circled her desk, surveying the room like it was a battlefield. He stopped at her father's photograph on the bookshelf and stared for a moment longer than necessary. "Marcus spoke highly of you," he said. "Said you had his stubborn streak." Cassidy said nothing. He turned, and now the pleasant tone was gone. "Let me be clear. You are not in trouble?" "Yet." A long pause. "But you've crossed a very delicate threshold. I reported what I saw," Sir Cassidy said. "I followed the integrity chain." Dalton raised an eyebrow. "You confirmed the identity of a man presumed dead, who by all records was buried in the Afghan desert 15 years ago. You also failed to escalate the moment you made visual contact. I submitted my internal report within 24 hours. You sat on it for 6 days." Her voice didn't waver. "Because I was confirming more than his identity. I was confirming his humanity." Dalton narrowed his eyes. "This isn't about morality, Commander. This is about jurisdiction. The man known as Reaper 1 is part of a sealed black operation. His survival opens us to legal exposure, public scrutiny, and congressional review. The kind that dismantles entire chains of command." Cassidy stepped forward. "With respect, sir, what's more dangerous? A man who served with honor, hiding in a janitor's uniform, or a command that punished him for saving American lives?" Dalton didn't blink. "That's not your call." She held his gaze. "Maybe it should be someone's." For a moment the room was still. Then Dalton exhaled and looked away, as if the weight of history had brushed against him, and he didn't like the feeling. "Where is Dawson now?" he asked. "In the gym," she said. "As always, cleaning up after the future." Dalton stared at her, then without warning turned and left. Michael Dawson didn't stop mopping when the Admiral walked in, didn't change posture, didn't flinch. He was finishing a quiet pass across the mat when the presence at his back stiffened the air. "You missed a spot," Dalton said quietly. Michael straightened, turned, and nodded once. "Admiral." Dalton approached like he was crossing a minefield, slow and deliberate. 15 years, Dawson." Michael didn't respond. "They said you disobeyed orders, that you compromised a blackout op, that your actions could have cost millions in diplomatic fallout." Michael looked him in the eye. "Did it?" Dalton paused. "No." Michael nodded. "Then I regret nothing." Dalton folded his hands behind his back. "You should have taken the offer. Disappeared permanently. We gave you a chance at silence. I wasn't the one who broke it." Dalton smiled without humor. "And yet here you are, causing ripples. Again." Michael didn't blink. "I live quietly. I didn't ask to be found." Dalton studied him. "And yet, somehow, even now, people follow your example. The gym was empty, but the ghosts were loud. You could almost hear them, names no longer spoken, faces, long erased. Men who died on missions no one would ever acknowledge." Dalton stepped closer. "I'm ordering a closed evaluation. If you stay here, there will be oversight questioning. Maybe even a hearing. There are officers who want your blood for what you represent." Michael's eyes were calm. "I've given all the blood I'm willing to give." Dalton waited for anger. He found none, just gravity and quiet. He sighed. "You have 48 hours. Decide what you want. Stay and face the machine, or leave and protect what little peace you've made." Michael turned back toward the mop bucket. "I've made my choice." Dalton frowned. "You're not afraid of exposure." Michael looked over his shoulder. "I was afraid once, long time ago. That fear kept me alive." He dipped the mop. "But now I have a daughter, and fear has no place in the home she deserves." That night, Cassidy found Michael sitting outside the barracks watching the stars. His jacket was draped over his knees, his expression unreadable. "They want you gone," she said quietly. "I know. Are you going to leave?" Michael was silent. "Then I left once, 15 years ago. Thought it was the right thing to do. He looked at her. But maybe it's time I stay, even if it's hard. She sat beside him. They can't erase the past, she said. But they sure as hell try. Michael smiled. The past isn't my problem. What as he turned toward the gym, faintly glowing under floodlights in the distance. My problem is that these kids don't need another war story. They need someone to teach them how not to become one. Cassidy reached into her jacket, pulled out a sealed envelope, and handed it to him. What's this? My official statement. Filed with JAG and signed by 2 witnesses. It clears you of misconduct. Michael opened it, scanning the contents. She added, I'm betting on truth. Michael folded it slowly. I don't need your protection, he said gently. You're not getting it, she replied. You're getting my respect. And for the first time in many years, Michael Dawson didn't feel like a shadow. He felt seen. And in the eyes of a young commander who now stood where her father once fell, that was more powerful than any medal ever pinned. The hallway outside Admiral Dalton's private office was designed to feel cold. Unadorned walls, no plaques, no flags, just a line of chairs no one ever sat in, and the low hum of fluorescent lighting that seemed to whisper, don't get comfortable. Michael Dawson stood alone, hands folded behind his back, as he had so many times before, but in very different uniforms, under very different orders. This time, there was no weapon on his hip, no comlink in his ear, no mission waiting on the tarmac, just his truth. And the faint smell of ammonia still lingering on his clothes. The assistant stepped out. He'll see you now. Michael entered. The office was spacious but sterile. No clutter, no personal effects except for a single framed photograph on the far wall, a younger Dalton in full dress uniform standing beside a row of nameless men in desert camo. One of them barely visible might have been Michael, but only he would know. Admiral Charles Dalton sat behind a wide desk, fingers-steepled expression unreadable. Mr. Dawson, he said, motioning toward the chair across from him. Or do you still go by Reaper 1 in certain circles? Michael took the seat calmly. Only in whispers. And only by the dead. Dalton allowed a faint grimace. Still poetic, I see. I don't get many chances to talk these days. Dalton leaned back. You've created a complicated situation. I have senior brass asking if Echo 6 has been harboring a fugitive, congressional aides circling like sharks, and yet, here you sit, calm as ever. Michael shrugged. I've lived through worse scrutiny. Dalton tapped a folder in front of him. I read Cassidy's statement. And yours. I even reviewed the original incident report, what little of it wasn't burned or redacted. He looked up. You disobeyed a direct order from Central Command. I saved a man, Michael said evenly. You compromised a theater of operations. I preserved what was left of its integrity. Dalton stared for a long moment, then closed the file. You've never been much for politics. I've seen what politics leaves behind when it fails, Michael replied. Usually men like me picking up pieces. Dalton exhaled and stood walking to the window. His voice shifted less, bureaucrat, more soldier. You were one of the best. Maybe the best. You know that, don't you? Michael didn't answer. Dalton turned back, squinting at him like he was trying to find the ghost behind the man. I read a field report once. Said you walked 4 miles through hostile terrain with a fractured femur, carrying 2 wounded on your shoulders. They called it impossible. Michael's voice was quiet. I didn't know it was fractured until 2 days later. Dalton almost smiled. Then the moment passed. You could have been anything, an instructor, an admiral, hell, even a legend, but you chose to mop sweat and clean up after kids who don't even know your name. Michael leaned forward now. Because those kids still have a chance to learn what I didn't. Dalton arched an eyebrow. And what's that? That winning isn't the same as surviving. That killing doesn't make you strong. And that may be the most important thing a man can do, is sweep up the wreckage quietly after the war ends. Silence. The weight of it was profound. Michael continued. You spend your whole life thinking you're supposed to fight. And then one day, someone hands you a broom, and you realize this, too, is sacred work. Dalton didn't speak for a while. Then quietly, your daughter. Clara. Michael's eyes softened. She's the only thing I ever fought for that made me whole. Dalton nodded slowly. I won't pretend the system is ready for someone like you. It never was. I'm not asking for its approval. Dalton returned to his desk. But it has to respond, he said. There are optics, protocols, people demanding punishment for the paperwork you broke, not the life you saved. Michael waited. Dalton opened a drawer and pulled out a sealed manila envelope. This is a compromise, he said. You stay on base. No uniform. No official title. But you'll begin assisting with leadership training. Informally. Off record. They'll report to me, not command. Michael took the envelope, but didn't open it. Dalton added, You'll be invisible again. Just how you like it. Michael finally looked him in the eye. No one's invisible forever. Dalton gave a faint nod. And that Dawson is what scares them. When Michael stepped out into the corridor, Cassidy was waiting. She didn't speak, just watched him walk toward her. He handed her the envelope. Good news, she asked. He shrugged. That depends on your definition of freedom. She opened it. Read the contents. Her expression flickered from suspicion to quiet understanding. They're letting you stay, she said. For now. You'll be mentoring, he smiled. I'll still sweep. I'll just sweep minds too. She chuckled, but her eyes didn't. Was it hard? Michael paused. Yes, but not because of the Admiral. Then he looked past her toward the gym across the compound, where young SEALs ran drills, unaware of the quiet conversation unfolding. Because it reminded me how easy it is to erase someone, even when they never stop showing up. Cassidy reached for his arm. You're not erased. Michael's voice was quiet. I was never here for credit, just to be useful. And you are, she said. More than you know. They stood in silence for a moment, the wind from the bay rustling the flags behind them. Michael took a breath, then said something almost too soft to hear. Then let's get back to work. Morning roll call began as it always did. Brisk wind sweeping across the asphalt, boots crunching in perfect rhythm, instructors barking out assignments with clipped precision. The flag had been raised 20 minutes earlier. The base had begun to breathe. Inside the gym it was quieter. The recruits were mid-drill bodyweight circuits, gear runs, low-volume sparring. Michael Dawson moved through the rows with mop and bucket in tow, doing what he always did, silently making the chaos just a little cleaner. But something was different today. There was tension in the air, a hum beneath the surface. Eyes followed him more often now, not with mockery, but with cautious curiosity. Respect was too big a word for what most of the younger SEALs felt. But something had shifted. Whispers of the tattoo, hints of an identity. The presence of Admiral Dalton on base had poured gasoline on the rumors. Still, Michael remained unchanged. Still quiet, still steady, still cleaning up after others without asking for credit. Cassidy Miller entered the gym from the east entrance, just as the morning light hit the mats. She scanned the room like she always did, assessing form, spotting weaknesses. But her eyes paused when they landed on Michael. He was on one knee, adjusting a dumbbell rack that had drifted off alignment. Hands calloused, movements precise. The image of a man who had carried the weight of history and decided to set it down gently. She walked across the floor. A few heads turned. She stopped 2 feet in front of him. Mr. Dawson, she said, formally loud enough for the entire gym to hear. Michael stood slowly. eyes calm. "Yes, Commander. I've received final confirmation from Admiral Dalton's office," she said. "Effective immediately, you're to begin mentorship integration with the new recruits. Off-record, non-uniformed." Murmurs spread across the gym. Michael gave a small nod. "Copy that." Cassidy paused, then added quieter, but more personal. "And by my authority as commanding officer of Echo 6, you are no longer to be referred to as janitor. You will be addressed as Mr. Dawson and shown the respect owed to any man who's walked through fire for this flag." The murmurs stopped. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was reverent. And then, before anyone could fully process the shift, the gym doors opened again. Admiral Dalton entered. No aides, no clipboard. Just the weight of 4 stars and a lifetime of decisions behind him. Every recruit stiffened. Cassidy turned, snapped to attention. "Admiral on deck." Dalton raised a hand. "As you were." He walked with slow purpose across the gym. The floorboards creaked slightly beneath his boots. He stopped just a few paces from Michael. "You're still here," Dalton said. Michael nodded. "Wasn't done mopping." A small smile ghosted across the Admiral's face. "Of course not." The Admiral turned to the room. "This man," he said, voice clear and authoritative, "served under no flag but sacrifice. He held no rank that you could pin to a collar, and yet his actions carried the weight of command." He looked to Cassidy, then back to Michael. "Many of you have been told to model discipline, strength, honor. Today you're looking at all 3. Then, in a movement so unexpected that half the gym actually gasped, Admiral Charles Dalton stood at attention, straightened his spine, and raised a salute. Right there, to a man with no stripes, no medals, no uniform. Only a mop and a past no one had dared speak of. Cassidy stepped beside the Admiral. She saluted too. And then one by one, like dominoes, falling with silent dignity, every recruit in the gym stood up, some still mid-rep, some with chalk-covered hands, and raised their hands to their foreheads. A wall of silent respect. Michael didn't move at first, didn't return the gesture. He stood as still as stone eyes drifting across the sea of hands, faces he barely knew, muscles still growing, hearts not yet broken by real loss. And then slowly his hand rose. Not stiff, not showy, just a quiet echo of everything he once was, and everything he had become. He saluted. The room held the silence like a breath that no one wanted to exhale. And then quietly, gently, Michael dropped his hand. "Thank you," he said. Simply, without flourish. Dalton nodded once. "No," the Admiral replied. "Thank you. For staying." Then he turned and left. No further words. No orders. No ceremony. He'd done what the machine never allowed before. He'd acknowledged the ghost and let him stand in the daylight. Later, Cassidy found Michael folding towels in the locker room as if nothing had changed. "You didn't expect that, did you?" she asked. He didn't look up. "Not expecting is the safest bet." She smiled. "Are you okay?" He paused, then said something so quiet it nearly broke her. I didn't think I'd ever be seen again. Cassidy stepped forward, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You weren't just seen, Michael. You were honored." He folded the last towel. "Now comes the harder part." "What's that?" He looked at her with eyes full of calm resolve. "Earning it." The bay was quiet that evening. Waves rolled in gentle, deliberate rhythms, brushing the dock with the tenderness of memory. Moonlight rippled on the surface like silver thread, unraveling across the water, and the air smelled of salt pine, and something older, like peace, finally remembered. Michael Dawson stood at the end of the weathered pier, hands in his jacket pockets, eyes on the horizon. He had stood in places like this before, on landing pads, tarmac edges, mountain ridgelines. But this was different. This wasn't a lookout. This was a pause, a stillness not born from exhaustion, but from acceptance. Behind him, boots echoed across the wooden slats, lighter than most. Measured. Familiar. "Commander," he said without turning. Michael Cassidy Miller corrected gently as she stepped beside him. "I think after this week you've earned the right to call me Cassidy." He smiled faintly. Old habits die hard. She folded her arms, watching the water with him. "The recruits are still talking about this morning," she said. "I'm sure they'll forget it by next week," Michael replied. Cassidy shook her head. "Not this time." They stood in silence, letting the waves speak for them. After a moment, she said softly, "My father used to sit at the end of docks like this. Said the ocean helped him think." Michael nodded. "Your father was a good man. I never got to ask him if he was ever afraid," she whispered. Michael's voice was low. "We're always afraid. We just learn to carry it quietly." She looked at him, then really looked. The faint creases near his eyes, the weathered strength in his jaw, the shoulders that had once carried men through gunfire, now wrapped in a jacket that smelled of floor polish and old memories. "You're still carrying it," she said. "Some weight doesn't go away," he replied. "It just shifts." Cassidy hesitated, then reached into her pocket and pulled out a small envelope. She handed it to him without a word. Michael opened it slowly. Inside was a folded drawing crayon on construction paper. A little girl with curly brown hair, standing beside a tall man with a mop in one hand and a flower in the other. Underneath, in uneven lettering, "To the man who makes my dad smile." Clara Michael's throat tightened. "She slipped it to me this morning," Cassidy said, her voice soft. "Said you haven't laughed that much in years." Michael ran a thumb over the crayon lines. "She's more than I deserve." "She's the best thing about you," Cassidy replied. "But not the only thing." He looked at her cautious. "You ever think about starting over?" she asked suddenly. He raised an eyebrow. "That's a dangerous question for a woman in uniform." Cassidy smiled. "Good. I meant it to be." Michael looked down at the drawing again. "I think about it every day," he said. "But starting over, it's not always a clean slate. Sometimes it's learning to live with the writing that's already on it." She nodded slowly. "I'm not asking for answers," she said. "Just wondering if you'd let someone walk with you through it." There it was. Not romance, not promises. Permission to share space, time, healing. Michael didn't answer right away. Instead, he pulled something from his jacket pocket, a small worn patch with faded stitching. The insignia was barely visible now, a ghost-shaped reaper holding a trident in one hand, a rose in the other. He handed it to her. It was never official. Our unit made them for ourselves. One each. No backups, no replacements. Cassidy held it carefully. "You kept it all these years," Michael's voice softened. "Because one day I wanted to give it to someone who wouldn't fear the man I was, or the man I've tried to become." Their eyes met, and in that moment, the ocean, the sky, the weight of 2 lifetimes paused around them. Cassidy tucked the patch gently into her breast pocket. "Then consider it honored," she said. They stood for a while longer, side by side, not speaking, because there was nothing left to say. When Michael finally turned to go, she walked with him, not behind, not ahead. Beside him. Like she always should have. Later that night in the quiet of his quarters, Michael placed Clara's drawing beside the folded American flag on his dresser. He looked at both for a long time. Then he did something he hadn't done in a decade. He took off his boots and sat on the floor, back against the wall, knees pulled in. Clara was asleep in the next room, her soft breathing the only sound in the world. And Michael Dawson Reaper, one ghost of the battlefield janitor of second chances, leaned his head back against the wall, and smiled. Not because the world was fixed, but because for the first time in a long time, his heart had room to breathe. The morning sun filtered through the high windows of the gym, casting long golden streaks across the polished floors. The scent of fresh chalk and yesterday's effort still lingered in the air. But today, there was a new energy, quieter, steadier, like the atmosphere had shifted from testing limits to seeking something deeper. In the center of the mat stood Michael Dawson. No uniform, no insignia, just a dark gray t-shirt, training pants, and bare feet rooted in experience. Around him, 15 SEAL recruits stood in a half-circle, some nervous, some skeptical, all curious. Word had spread fast. The janitor's now the mentor. Some called it a PR stunt. Others said it was a reward for a favor. But those who had seen the tattoo, they didn't speak at all. Cassidy Miller watched from the far wall, arms folded, expression unreadable. But in her eyes was trust. She had asked for this, not for performance, but for presence. These young men didn't need another tactical playbook. They needed someone who had been there and had come back with his soul intact. Michael took a breath and looked at them. "I'm not here to impress you," he said, voice even. "I'm not here to motivate you with speeches or break you with drills." He walked slowly across the mat. "I'm here to teach you one thing how to last." That got their attention. "You've got strength," he continued. "You've got speed. Some of you can shoot the wings off a fly midair, but that's not what gets you home." He paused. "What gets you home is learning how to carry pain without spreading it, how to lead without needing a spotlight, how to stay alive without losing who you are." He looked around. "That's what no one teaches you. That's what took me 15 years and 1,000 mistakes to learn. So if you're ready for that, we begin." And just like that, they dropped into the ready stance. No barking, no questions. Just respect. Earned. Not demanded. In the corner of the gym, Clara Dawson, 10 years old and bright-eyed, sat cross-legged on a folded gym mat. A sketch pad rested on her lap, colored pencils scattered around her like flower petals. She watched her father with quiet pride, head-tilted ponytail, bouncing as she scribbled. Cassidy walked over and knelt beside her. "What are you drawing today?" she asked. Clara grinned. "My dad." Cassidy peeked at the page. It was Michael, strong but soft-eyed, standing in front of a group of confused-looking trainees. Above his head was a little speech bubble. "Kindness is a muscle, too." Cassidy chuckled. "That's surprisingly accurate." Clara nodded. "He says that a lot." Cassidy smiled, then glanced toward Michael. His posture was calm but commanding. His words weren't loud, but they landed like anchors. He wasn't just teaching tactics. He was teaching how to be whole. After the session, the recruits dispersed slower this time. A few lingered asking questions. One even stayed behind to thank Michael. The skeptical looks had faded, replaced with something heavier. Respect. Michael wiped his hands with a towel and turned to find Cassidy and Clara waiting near the benches. "You looked like you belonged there," Cassidy said. Michael raised an eyebrow. "Still just a man with a mop." "Maybe," she said. "But the mop's starting to look more like a staff." He chuckled. Clara ran up and hugged his waist. "You forgot your water bottle." Michael ruffled her hair. "That's why I have you." Cassidy stepped closer. "There's a calm around you when you teach," she said. "Like, you're not just remembering who you were, but finally becoming who you were supposed to be." Michael looked at her, the smile fading into something deeper. "I don't know what I'm becoming," he admitted, "but it feels lighter." Cassidy reached into her pocket and handed him something. It was a folded sheet of paper, official Navy stationery. He opened it. Inside was a notice unofficial mentor program, approved for indefinite duration, signed by Dalton himself. I didn't expect this, he said. Cassidy shrugged. He says you still scare half the Joint Chiefs. The other half want you to write a book, Michael smirked. I'd rather build something with my hands. You are, she said. You're building men. He looked at her, then at Clara, who had wandered back to her sketch pad. His voice softened. Then maybe this really is a second beginning. That evening, the gym was empty. The sun dipped low across the base, casting long shadows over the pull-up bars and the bleachers. Michael moved slowly through the space, not cleaning, but walking, absorbing. The echoes of his own voice from earlier seemed to still hang in the air. Learn how to carry pain without spreading it. He ran his hand along the edge of the mat, then turned to find Cassidy leaning against the doorway. She said nothing, just watched him. You ever think peace can sneak up on you? He asked. She stepped forward. Only when you stop running from it. He nodded slowly. I ran for a long time. Cassidy stood beside him now, close enough that he could feel the warmth of her presence. Then maybe it's time to walk, she said. He turned to her. I don't know where it goes. She smiled. That's the best part. He chuckled quiet real. And in that gym under the hum of tired lights and the scent of old sweat and new beginnings, Michael Dawson reached out not for a weapon, not for a wall, but for a future. One step, one word, one life at a time. The sun was setting over Echo 6. Golden light stretched across the base, like a benediction softening the hard lines of concrete and steel. Shadows leaned long over the parade ground. A hush had settled, not the silence of absence, but of completion. Michael Dawson stood alone on the observation deck above the obstacle course, the same place where young men proved their mettle every week. Today there were no shouts, no drills, no barked orders, just wind and memory. He leaned against the railing, eyes scanning the field. He saw scuffed boots, broken barriers, and men rebuilding themselves. He'd walked these grounds now not as a ghost, but as a witness. He didn't teach them how to shoot or run faster. He taught them how to come home different and still whole. He hadn't asked for this role, but it had found him anyway. Behind him, the door opened with a quiet hiss. He didn't have to look. I figured you'd be up here, Cassidy Miller said. He nodded. Couldn't sleep. Funny, she said. I always assumed men like you slept like rocks. I did, Michael replied, until I started remembering what peace feels like. She joined him at the railing, folding her arms. Her uniform was looser tonight, softened from duty, not decorum. The stripes still sharp, but the woman in them, relaxed. More herself. They watched the sun dip lower. Cassidy broke the silence. There's something I want to show you. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small object wrapped in cloth. He unfolded it carefully. It was a dog tag, old, scratched, and blackened from heat. The letters nearly rubbed smooth, but still legible. Dawsonum Unit. Undisclosed blood type O neg status unknown. Michael stared at it. I found it in my father's effects, Cassidy said softly. He never explained where it came from, just said he didn't need it anymore. But I did. Michael traced the edge with his thumb. He was wrong, he said. Cassidy looked at him. I needed to be reminded I was real. He folded the cloth back over the tag and held it in his fist. You gave this to him, she asked. Michael nodded. The night I carried him out. He was bleeding bad. I thought he'd die on me. And you gave up your identity, he shook his head. No, I gave up my permission to disappear. Cassidy swallowed hard. He carried you with him every day after that. Michael looked out at the empty field again. I think I always hoped someone would carry me forward. Cassidy touched his arm. They are. A week later, the gym was louder than usual. Not from training, but from laughter. Clara Dawson ran across the mats in pigtails and sneakers, chasing a paper airplane she'd drawn a smiley face on. Several of the recruits were accidentally in her way, pretending to be giants she had to dodge. She weaved through them like a pro. Michael sat on the bench, water bottle in hand, watching her. Cassidy came and sat beside him. "She's fearless," she said. "She's free," Michael corrected. He turned to her. "You did that." Cassidy shook her head. "No, you did. I just cleared the fog." A pause. Then she handed him a manila envelope. He opened it slowly. Inside a letter, handwritten, beautiful script. The signature at the bottom made his chest tighten. General Marcus Miller. "Michael, if you're reading this, then you kept your promise. I don't know what role you've stepped into now, but I know you've done it quietly, with dignity. My daughter is strong because of you, even if she doesn't know it yet. She may one day lead others through storms she'll never be thanked for. And when she doubts, remind her that the greatest leaders don't speak the loudest. They stand the longest, just like you did. Thank you for saving me, and thank you for teaching her." Marcus Michael folded the letter with shaking fingers. "He wrote that before he died," he asked. Cassidy nodded. He left it in a sealed box marked, "Only if Michael Dawson ever walks back into the light." Michael swallowed hard. No words, no need. That night, the gym was empty again. The echo of footsteps faded. Lights dimmed. Quiet returned. Michael walked alone down the corridor toward the janitor's closet. He paused outside the door. The old sign was still there. Facility maintenance. He opened it. Inside, mop, bucket, gloves, bleach, towels. He stood for a long time, then closed the door, and quietly, deliberately, placed the key on the floor outside. When he turned, Cassidy was waiting. "You sure?" she asked. He nodded. "Someone else can sweep the dust now." She smiled. And you, Michael, looked at her, then out into the night beyond the open bay doors. "I think I'll sweep mines for a while longer." 2 days later, Michael Dawson stood under the rising sun with a fresh group of recruits. No medals, no insignia, just his voice. "What we do here isn't about building muscle," he said. "It's about building memory." They listened, eyes focused, jaws tight, shoulders back. He continued. "The only thing you carry past the battlefield is who you are when the noise stops." One recruit raised his hand. "Sir, how do we know we're ready for the silence?" Michael smiled. "You don't," he said. "But when the time comes, you'll remember how to listen to it." Where are you watching from tonight? I'd love to know. Share your city or country in the comments below, because every story feels a little more alive when we know who's out there listening. If this story touched your heart or reminded you of someone you once knew, please consider subscribing to Soul Moment Story. It's free, and it helps us keep sharing these quiet, powerful moments of kindness, courage, and redemption. Thank you truly for spending your time with us. Until the next story, stay kind, stay hopeful, and keep the light in your heart alive.